Welcome to another episode of Artist Spotlight, the podcast. I'm your host, Mitch Stringer. As always, the podcast brought to you by your friends at the Maryland Photography Alliance, where you can check out everything that's going on photography-wise. You can learn about upcoming events and contests and just a lot of good information for you to be aware of. And if you check out the site one week, come back the next, there's a pretty good chance there's going to be additional information that's available and helping you meet like-minded people and get out there and work on the hobby that you all enjoy. Well, I've got a very special guest, and we're coming to you from a very unique part of the world right now. I'm in Hanoi, Vietnam, and I'm joined for now a second time by my good friend and wildlife photographer and photography guide, Marlon Toit from Johannesburg, South Africa, and just really a unique place to be. And Marlon, I'm just really enjoying every minute. What about you?
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. Thanks for having me again, and hi to all the listeners. I got excited when we started planning this trip. You know, the original trip being Borneo, which we kick off in a day or two's time. But really good to be in a brand new country, a brand new city, with so many photographic opportunities, and to spend time here with a good friend, Mitch. It's been great so far. Really been enjoying it.
You know, I think for people listening, they're probably thinking about really going to any destination, and we can certainly use Hanoi as the example. But when you're going to somewhere that maybe you're not familiar with, and you're going to have some street photography, if that's what you enjoy, you're going to have some destination photography, some specific points of interests. How to plan, how to get ready for it in terms of not only deciding where you want to visit, but then looking at your gear and deciding what's enough without being too much. What's kind of your process in a place like this where it's not the traditional wildlife photography where you've got the long lenses, etc. You've got to bring a different assortment with you.
Yeah, it's a good question because it's something new and different for me, Mitch. It's a brand new environment. It's a place that I don't often put myself into, but it's something I do enjoy, which is photographing people, especially when I get the opportunity, and especially when it's something to do with culture. And I think if I were to prepare specifically for something like this, if I may be a little technical, then I guess I would have packed differently even for what I did this time, because the actual trip is Borneo, wildlife, more traditional gear. But to add to that, to prepare a little bit for this, I bought a 24 to 70. I enjoy that lens. It's nice and versatile, and I think the wider lenses with people, and especially including a little bit about the person's environment where they live, their habitat, perhaps. That's always nice. So, and wide lens is great. And then the other lens I've been using here a lot is the 70 to 200. Sony's got a great f4 model that's nice and lightweight, easy to handle and travel with, and just shooting those two side by side. I would have loved to bring a 135 1.8. I'm missing that lens a little bit. I think that could have been a whole lot of fun out here. And then maybe like something like a 50mm 1.2, or just a great lens with a great bit of bokeh. I think those are two lenses I probably would have brought with as well. I'm new to this, and I'm sure there's a whole list of lenses that would do very well. You're limited to what you can bring. In this case, the 400 took up half the bag, so there wasn't much choice for anything else, but enjoying it. And then lastly, a camera that is a little bit out of place in the professional photographer's gear nowadays is the Insta. My Insta 360 for capturing cool travel moments and kind of shots of you in the field. I really enjoy using that a lot. I think it's as at home in the city as what it is in my hand when I'm in the field with wild animals as well.
There's a lot there to unpack, and I'll start sort of from the tail end of that and work backwards. You mentioned this Insta 360 camera, and it's a super cool, not only video, but a still camera, and to me it almost seems like a very modern version of the GoPro, which was, burst on the scene, and it was incredible. So, but you also had to, if you wanted sort of surrounding photos, you had to walk around with the dreaded selfie stick, and it was awkward and showed up in your videos. And, How has this 360 video camera sort of solved some of those things that the GoPro, even though it was great at the time and it's still certainly a useful tool, but how's the 360 different?
Yeah, it's great. It does what it says in the name. It's a 360 camera. It records all around you all the time. So you stick it out there, hit record, and you can kind of forget about it. You don't have to frame yourself. You can actually set it to even follow you in the frame if you want. But it'll record everything around you. And I think the great thing about it is the build quality, the structure. It's already waterproof to 15 meters. It's great in low light. It's 8K, 30 frames per second. So, it's got great tech within it. And then the editing suite is great as well. It's easy to use. You can edit from your phone. So I think they've just simplified it for you, for content creators, to be fast and efficient and to capture great content. And GoPro, they do have a 360 camera, but I think Insta has really captured the market with a few good products. And I think the X5, the 360 X5 has just led the way. So just a ton of fun to use, and often use it to capture BTS content. So whatever's happening around me, I have some brackets and mounts to stick it onto the camera, onto my lens, onto the car around me. I just let it roll, and it's great for capturing those moments that you often miss.
And just to be clear, BTS is not a boy band. It's behind the scenes.
Behind the scenes.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Could be a boy band.
Could be. So to sort of back up for a minute from the gear and talk more conceptually for people who are considering either a photography focused vacation or just a normal vacation, so to speak, but they want to make photography at least part of it. When you and I have been in Africa before, you often will talk about including the subject in their environment, meaning you don't just want a close-up portrait of a lion, using that example. You want the lion in the environment that it lives. Now, you may do a portrait, but you also want those wider shots. And I think that, in a place like Hanoi, where you've got just frenetic activity going on, I think the logic is still the same. There's opportunities for close-ups, but you want context for those close-ups and to show the world around that person and who's interacting with them or walking by them and the area they live and work and go. And so, it seems like, be it wildlife or what we're doing here with street photography, the idea of mixing close-up portraits along with environmental shots seems to be relevant in both cases.
Very much. I think you've pretty much answered the question there with some great thoughts and points. And for me in my photography, and I think this is the case, especially with people, is it's so much about a story, and that's kind of the key. And your lens arsenal is what you have to capture that story with, where you stand, what you include, how you frame, and so much so that whether it's tight or it includes some of the environment, the story is the key part. You want the viewer to not be confused about what they're looking at. I think when you work with people, there's so many amazing moments and stories, and as photographers, I'm sure you feel the same. Like, we kind of see the world differently. I think as you're walking, you're constantly framing. You're looking at light. You're looking at textures. You're looking at colors. You're looking at eyes and eye contact and hands. In Vietnam, you're looking at feet.
More than you'd ever expect.
But I think we're always looking for moments, and photography comes down to a single frame. You might shoot a series of images, but it's a frame that pulls it together at the end of the day, and that could be a wider moment, and I think it could be a closer moment. And your task as the photographer is to separate that from the chaos, to separate it from the busyness of what's happening around it, and to make it all complement. And it's much the same as in wildlife photography. You can often be faced with challenging scenes or busy scenes, but the skilled photographers and the people who are able to tell stories from that, I think that's where the message really shines through. And whether it's street or wildlife, I think that's where the end viewer, the person looking at the photograph, really gets hit by it.
Now, with you being very focused on wildlife photography, I think asking you this next question and for your opinion on it will resonate with a lot of people listening who've considered street photography, and that is interacting with subjects when you're in a street. There's always the question of, do you ask permission? Do you not ask permission? When do you ask permission? So, the last few days, has really been kind of a street photography intensive for you and I. I mean, I've done, and do a pretty fair amount of it, but again, it's not your specialty day in, day out. So, how have you felt is the right way for you, which can be different for anybody, to sort of navigate that? When do you ask? When don't you ask? If there's a language barrier, how do you ask without actually knowing the words in the language of the country you're in? How have you kind of worked through that while we've been here?
That's a good one, and I think I'm still, I wouldn't say finding my feet in that, but I think humans connect with humans, and I think photographers, or from my side, just the way I've interacted with people, greeting them with a smile, walking up, making eye contact, smiling, that already breaks the ice. You're not a stranger walking up and just snapping and going. But I think just a kind gesture, a smile is universal, and it shows you're friendly, you mean well, and I think it instantly puts most people at ease. I mean, there are people out here that have clearly shown us that didn't want to be photographed, and I've respected those wishes and not taken a photo of them. But where people were on the fence, I'd walk up and show them the photo, or say hello and be nice about it. And they always impressed seeing themselves on the camera, even though I'm sure they have before. But if you can do something pretty for them, then it genuinely works. And perhaps there's times here and there where you ask somebody to do something, or just to move a little bit and direct them a little bit, just to complement the shot. But it's still true to the scene that you saw. And I think it's nice. You connect with people, even though you don't understand one another. They know you're being kind, you're smiling, you're friendly. You take a great picture of them and you move on. So for me, that's kind of been the journey so far. Trying not to be too invasive, and when it really becomes clear that they don't want to be photographed, because you have to be so sensitive, right? Like, I'd imagine if I was at home having coffee or making food, and every 10 minutes a photographer comes by to take a picture of me, I consider that a private moment. So were you with your family or your kids or commuting in traffic, it's kind of weird. And so I don't want to be a pushy photographer taking advantage of people, and especially in areas where they're not as privileged. So there's always that, and I'm trying to eat the food. I'm trying to wear the shoes, our lobster shoes, which maybe there'll be a picture of at some point. But you're trying to, I guess, connect with them as well, to understand them better at the same time. So there's also that side where you don't want to take advantage of people, but you really want to try and immerse yourself into their culture as well. And I think that helps your photography at the end of the day.
Well, and I think we're showing them in a way that's flattering. So to your point, if there's sort of if they're not jumping up and down and saying, please take my picture, but they sort of agree to it and you show them the picture, they see that you're really showing them in a nice light, and you're being respectful and so forth. And, the thing that I connect with is when you ask someone to take their photo in a public setting. So they're in public. They've made that decision to be out amongst everybody. There's sort of a tacit approval of being photographed. You're not running up in their face. You are at a appropriate, respectful distance, and you're making a picture. And certainly if they get offended, you can apologize. You can delete it. Although many will say that's not really appropriate because they're in a public space. You haven't invaded their home or done anything wrong, let alone illegal. But once people start posing for pictures, you lose that spontaneity. You lose the realness of what you're photographing, and then no longer are you documenting their lives in that place that you're at. So, it's a fine line. It really is. Otherwise, you just end up with a series of pictures of people essentially smiling and saying cheese, which is not really what it's all about. And not to be so hardcore as Cartier-Bresson's Decisive Moment. I don't know that we're necessarily photographing that type of an image all the time, but if not decisive, it's an honest moment. It's a real moment, whether people are interacting with one another, or they're a vendor in a fish market and they're calling customers, and we're not interrupting them, and they are in a public space. And so I think that for those who may say you really shouldn't do that, I would sort of challenge that perspective of shouldn't, because people are in that kind of a public space. One thing that I've heard many times is people who are considering traveling somewhere. Some people have said, don't read books on the place. Don't watch YouTube videos, because either consciously or subconsciously, you're going to go there trying to recreate the same photos that you saw. For me, it's a bit more of reconnaissance than it is seeing something and saying, I want to make that exact picture. So, where do you sort of come down, whether it's here or a street photography situation, or maybe it's a lodge or an area in Africa, Brazil, Japan, Svalbard, anywhere that you travel, but you haven't been to yet? How much pre-trip reconnaissance and research do you do, and how much do you think is helpful, and how much maybe can create unrealistic expectations?
Yeah, and I'm of the same opinion as you, Mitch. Like, I enjoy researching. I want to see what's been done, what the atmosphere is, where people have shot, where people go. I think that's a great part of the journey. Is it gets you really excited for that, and it's not to emulate or copy what other people have done before you. And I think it just gives you a great sense of perspective and a fresh idea of where to go and maybe what you can build on from there. Had we not done that, maybe we wouldn't have gone out to photograph at the incense fields, because we would have had no idea or wouldn't have known what the potential is from there. But I think we got a great, unique perspective on it. And it's much the same for wildlife destinations. You have to know what you're getting yourself into. You got to kind of have an idea of the terrain, the landscape, and that leads to what lenses you'll be taking and what the best time of year is. Is there a favorite season? Do you go to India during festivals, and where do you go? What are the best vantage points? We did the train the other day. Even there, it was great to reference a few photographs, find a good angle. People have done this before from great angles, and it gives you an idea on that, and I think as a good photographer you can perhaps improve on that or put your own spin or flavor on it. So no, I'm with you. I think it's a good idea to have a firm understanding of where you're going, and it's certainly not to copy, but I love drawing inspiration from other people's work, yours included, and I think that to me is part of the journey, is that the networking, the inspiration, just seeing what others have done before you.
From a practical standpoint, I sort of phrased it this way earlier, whether you're going on a photography centric trip or it's just a part of the trip, but it's important to you. Things break, gear breaks, people forget batteries, people forget memory cards, cameras break down. What would be your suggestion to people who, they want to do photography in a more serious way than just their cell phone? And if that piece of equipment breaks, they're in an unfamiliar place that may or may not have an opportunity to purchase new gear or rent new gear or rent, some gear that they need. So, without duplicating literally every single thing that you're bringing, what do you think sort of the minimum duplication it should be, so that you don't get there and find that something's not working and now, that part of your trip is just shut down?
It's a good question, because I dropped 2 cameras yesterday.
You did?
I think, you have to, in the very least, travel with 2 camera bodies. It's my recommendation for all my guests. Not all my guests own 3 camera bodies, or even 2 for that matter, but I get them to rent. And you should always, in my opinion, rent the best camera gear that you can, or bring it along. You do 1, 2, maybe 3 trips a year. You got to be well prepared, have good camera gear. It'll make the difference, and renting is a great option for that. So I've had several times over the last couple of years where guests have had a single camera broken. And in fact, earlier this year, I had a guest who, against my recommendation, just brought 1 camera out to the Serengeti. And I advised against it. He brought one. He dropped his bag on the airport on the way to the lodge, smashed the back of the screen, and had an effect on the camera. And he didn't have a camera for the entire trip. We tried to get him a rescue camera in the meantime, and it's tough to do from Tanzania. We got him it wasn't a great camera, but it ruins literally your trip, and he wasn't able to take the photographs that he had in mind. So absolutely, 2 camera bodies for me in the very least. On this trip I've got 3, and if one breaks, you have a fail-safe or a backup, but make sure that they're both, don't have one being the camera you had for the last 10 years. Make sure you have two good cameras. And in terms of lenses, it's tough to look after those, in the sense that, if my 400 breaks, then you can't just carry a spare telephoto lens like that. So ultimately, you want to look after your gear. Make sure you handle your camera bag. Whether it's arriving at the hotel, whether it's going through the airport, I pick up my bag, I have it across my shoulders, because people don't understand the value and what it's worth to you, what's in that camera bag. And I think it's a mistake a lot of people make, is not being in control of that bag. So I think that's one of the first rules for me. Just make sure your gear is in your control. You're going to look after it the best. You care for it the most. And a camera body is where you can really make a difference. If a lens drops, I've often seen the camera break before the lens. These lenses are strong. And it means that you've got that backup camera, and at worst, you'll be changing lenses. But just take care of it. If you're heading into a rainy situation, have your covers ready. If you're heading into a dusty situation, use those covers again. Just take care of it on the vehicle. Have it in your lap. Have it bounce around on the safari vehicle. There's a few steps you can take. And just to avoid that situation. That's the worst. You don't want to be in a place and not have a camera.
Yeah, no doubt. And I would also say, when you're flying, especially, make sure you understand the weight and size restrictions, because you don't want to be in a situation where the person at the ticket desk or the counter, or when you're getting on the plane, says, we're going to have to check that bag, because you do not want your camera gear under the plane.
Absolutely.
It's just not, it's not very welcoming to your equipment. If you lose your underwear, and if you lose some shirts, those are easier to get. And just as they say, if you have medication that you need daily, keep it on your body, keep it on your person. And I would say the same exact thing with your camera gear, because that's not something that can be replaced. So it's super important. The other thing that I think is important, especially when you're traveling to some further flung locations, we had, I had a direct flight here, or actually, two flights to get here. But when you have multiple flights, and you're going through airports you might be familiar with, you might not be, you may be flying airlines that you're not familiar with, things are going to happen. There's going to be flight delays, there's going to be bad weather, there's going to be mechanical issues, you might miss a connecting flight. And so, what would be your advice, Marlon, when it comes to, the expression packing your patience, taking a deep breath, and understanding that, whatever happens, you can work through it and get to where you're trying to get to, whether it's hours late or even a day late. But these things are going to happen the further you travel, and the more connecting flights, and the time of year. How do you keep your patience during that whole process?
We have a thing we say in Africa when we travel around, and it's this is Africa, baby. You've just got to smile and enjoy the journey, because it's not if it's going to happen, it's only a matter of when. I've had people take a lunch break as we're about to stamp our passports, almost late for a flight, and the person at the other side took a 15-minute lunch break, just disappeared, left everyone in the queue standing, and you can get upset about it. It's not going to change the situation, and that's why the patience, the resilience, just enjoy the experience, enjoy the journey, and it'll be a much better time for you than working yourself up over every flight delay or every anything like that. And it also comes into play with, just to add to what you said earlier, when you research an area or you understand what to expect, you pack better. So you can pack, especially the telephoto lens. I find I'm always kind of have a 7200 or 1635, 2470. But it's, do you take a zoom telephoto? Do you take a fixed 4? Do you take a 6? Do you try and double up with teleconverters? I'm not going to take a 300mm to the Himalayas, because I'll find myself well short on distance. So understanding what you're getting yourself into means you can pack efficiently, you can pack effectively, and keep gear weight down if you need to. And I'm always, I don't want to be, I'm not a negative guy. I always try and be friendly. And whenever I meet people at the airport, the check-in counters and dealing with officials, and you just got to smile, be nice. I will always ask about their day. I very often show them photos of what I took in their country. and hopefully none of them are listening. But it keeps them distracted, and they can know that you've enjoyed it, and they often just let you through without having you stress about the weight of your camera bag. And another trick is definitely swing it across your shoulders. So keep the bag in your back, and if it's in the trolley and they see it, they might ask, "Is that a check-in bag, sir?" Because it's really big, and then the questions start. So keep your bag on your back. It often helps and gets you through airports a little bit faster. But patience, and not just forceful patience, but just understand it's a journey. Enjoy every moment, and it all adds to a good story afterwards.
Well, and also, whatever country, whether you're coming from the U.S. or wherever you are, there's different cultural norms in different places. And where you live and what you're used to is probably not exactly what they're used to wherever you're visiting. So, when you're used to, something taking 5 minutes and it's taking 25 minutes, you can get frustrated, but it's not going to help you at all.
Nothing.
And it's certainly not going to get anyone there to help you. In fact, probably the opposite will be true. So, getting more flies, with honey than vinegar is definitely, something that you want to use, and you want to just, take a deep breath. You can also, just talking about the gear for a minute, if you're going with a tour operator, they're certainly going to have recommendations. If you're considering traveling, you can always DM me on Instagram or shoot me an email, and I'll give you, whatever benefit of my experience. And there's also, of course, YouTube and other resources where people have traveled to a given country or region. But educate yourself about that, because you really want to be prepared, but you also don't want to carry a 30-pound pack if you don't need one. And so it's really about finding that happy medium between carrying what you need and not what you don't, and just making it a really comfortable experience. Because if you do, and it's comfortable, and you get great images, and it's a good experience, not surprisingly, you're probably going to want to keep doing that. You're probably going to want to keep traveling for photography, or making it a big part of what you do. So, it's like anything. Just be an educated, photographer, an educated consumer, and also make sure that you bring adapters, power adapters, because you may not think about this, but every country pretty much has its own version of electrical outlets. And adapters are key to adapt your plug to the plug that might be in your hotel or your cabin or your lodge or the generator that's there, whatever it is. So, that's super important to be aware of. Talking specifically about Hanoi, what was your expectation, Marlon, before, we sort of bolted a few days here onto, as you said, a primary trip focused on wildlife. So, coming in here, what did you kind of think about Hanoi, and then what did you see that either sort of reaffirmed that or that surprised you?
Uh, Quite honestly, I didn't really know what to expect beyond what I looked at in terms of pictures and a bit of research. I think so many people, when you hear the word Vietnam, you think about the history and the conflict with the U.S. That's no secret, and having that in the back of your mind, and as a point of reference, it was quite interesting to visit. And we in fact did visit one of the areas. The Hanoi Hilton, which is a famous landmark during that escalation, and I got a great new deep respect for not only the city and everything that happened, but what the people have been through, and their attitude towards the rest of the world, and how they've been able to put certain things aside. It's I think that's been great to see. People here are friendly, they're welcoming, their hospitality is great, the food's been great. The city is green, which is really, really cool. It's just made me want to see more of Vietnam, and to go travel more throughout the whole. It's a big country. It's a long country to get through, and we genuinely, you need more time. But I think the time we spent here was just the right amount, and seeing a city that's vibrant and colorful and green and busy, without feeling unsafe or feeling like you can't eat the food. And we had street food on numerous occasions, and that's not something I'm often open to, and it just felt like you could do that here. So just genuinely impressed and surprised, and an experience that I genuinely enjoyed, and I'm coming back next year. So I've got the Borneo trip again, and I'm bringing my wife, and that says a lot. There's a lot of places you can go to, but I wanted to come and experience Vietnam, and I look forward to that experience as well with her. So great city and great people.
Yeah, we've really, to say scratch the surface is probably even overstating it. We've barely made a dent in Vietnam, and with this just being kind of an idea to bolt onto our full purpose, so to speak, of traveling and this larger trip. We've seen Hanoi, and I'm sure there's more in Hanoi that we haven't seen. But then going up north to where they have all the terraced farming and the rice fields and the culture and the villages, and potentially going to see a significantly larger city, which is Saigon. So this has whet my appetite. In no way has this trip made me say, I can check that off my list now. Don't need to come back to Vietnam. It's done quite the opposite, because I mean we've seen part of one city, and as you said, you could easily spend 10 days to 2 weeks in Vietnam easily. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. My next trip, I'm already thinking about the next trip back here will be in July 2026, and it'll be a longer trip. I'll come explore some more, and definitely Hanoi again. I'd love for my wife to see that part, and it's always great to photograph it. But I'll be exploring more. I'll be coming back here. I think it's just a great country. The food is fantastic, the people, and it's just awesome. Got to come back.
Now, with you being a professional photographer and photography guide leader, when you're traveling with your wife, or your wife and your children, it's incumbent upon you to want to photograph what's around you, because it's just kind of part of who you are. And I know that you all travel often within the continent of Africa, and your kids like it a lot, and you and your wife met while you were both working at a lodge. But when you're getting outside of that kind of travel, what would be your suggestion to sort of balance, being with either a non-photographer or someone who doesn't take it as seriously as you, so that you can kind of enjoy that without the entire trip being about, whether it's a spouse, a partner, friends, without them looking at you like, hey, can you put the camera down for a minute? How do you suggest for people who might be in that situation to have everybody enjoy the trip without making it so sort of one-sided to your hobby or your passion?
Yeah, my wife will play witness to the fact that I still try to take my photos, but they give me a hard time at times. But no, I think they understand it's a passion, but it's also what I've made a career out of, and the kids love it. Often I try to include them in the frames and make sure they get featured a lot. And as any good Insta husband would, you're photographing basically your wife's personal photographer, which I enjoy. I think for me, we've got a good understanding and an idea of what to do. I'm mindful of time and getting around, and I haven't done too many cities with them, but I think that'll be great. And perhaps it will influence some of the photography time. It's always best to be on your own. You don't have, especially with children, you've got to think about their safety and well-being. But I think on your own, it's always going to be better. But I also want to share in these moments with family. We've spoken about this quite a bit. Is raising kids that travel a lot, and for me, I'd rather sacrifice some of the photographic moments for having family travel with me and see these places and having the stories to tell. They're at an age where they'll remember it very well as they get older, and I really want them to be world-wise and to see these places. And I'm used to it. When I have guests on safari, I never get my own shot first and foremost. I'm always looking after clients. I'm very used to taking the back seat and making sure that clients have the first shot and first right of photography. So whenever I do prioritize myself, it's not often, but I'm not offended when I can't take the photo that I had in mind, be it family or guests that are with me. So I think it works quite well, and I enjoy the travel side of it as well.
For me, as you know, I shoot a great deal of professional sports photography, and really enjoy wildlife photography. But when I'm in a given city and I have the opportunity to do street photography, I kind of get lost in the city in a way. And even though those are three different genres in that example with sports and wildlife and street photography, but I find that there are certain aspects of photography that carry over regardless of the genre, whether it's composition, anticipation, knowing the subject, and sort of being where you need to be before something happens because you think that it's going to happen shortly and you want to be ready for it. What are some of the things that you think are common throughout almost all genres of photography, skills or ways of approaching it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things more than likely, and some of the things you mentioned. I think for me, the strongest thread is a story, because like if I find myself looking at social media or looking at an image gallery, we went into a great gallery today, and I mean, a couple of photos stood out, and it was people, and it was, I think, people smiling. There was a mother and a child. It showed empathy and showed love and nurture, and there's a woman flipping her hair back, and it showed a vulnerable moment. And you instantly, those are the two. I can't remember any of the other images. Those are the ones you pointed out. The one I saw, the other one of the mother and child, and I think it's a story that connects with us, and we connect based on our backgrounds and how we've grown up and our interests. We connect with different images in different ways. Some people enjoy technical and the abstract side of things, and some enjoy emotions. And women are connected to different photographs. I see it in wildlife versus what men are drawn to. And I think that's an important thread is story, and finding that story. And you can be technical or not, but it's still something that you need to be mindful of. And I love that when a photograph is really good. If I think of photographs in the past that have stood out to me, it's my question is not what camera was used, what is the lens, what was the aperture, was it low light? You're just like, wow, that's great. I wonder what happened there. I wonder what they were thinking. I wonder what was going through their minds. I wonder what the animals did after that. And that's if you can ask those questions, it means it's a good photograph. And maybe afterwards you think like, geez, I wonder what that was shot with. But it certainly wasn't. In our heads, we're like, we all got the gear, and perhaps that's what we want people to understand is the technical side of it. But for me, the composition, the focus, the movement, it all plays a part, but it all culminates into, can you portray a story accurately, and does it connect with the viewer ultimately?
As hobbyist photographers or serious amateurs go to a place like Hanoi or wherever, you can often be overwhelmed by everything around you. I know when you take guests to safari, they see the first lion and they take 5,000 pictures of a lion that's asleep because it's so new, and it's, the lion's right there, and it's kind of overwhelming. And so, my analogy is in street photography or travel photography, you want to make pictures, you're excited to make pictures, you can't wait to get out on the street, but what's your direction? What's your purpose? Otherwise, you're sort of taking what, I might call grab shots. And, you have a bunch of photos when you're done, but there's no cohesiveness. And, something that I have told people when I've been asked is give yourself an assignment. Find a theme or two of a given location. And, it's not to say don't photograph other things, but if there is a thread or a theme throughout where you're going, shoot to that theme, make that the core, and then whether you make a book, a photo book, or whether you don't, but you can still use that theme as a way to give yourself some focus and a through line. So in Hanoi, what would you say have been some of those storytelling photos?
Yeah, it's also a great question. Just to add to that also the research, knowing where to go, is important, because it will help you get to your, what you had in mind faster. We had a guide on some of the days, and he was instantly just took us straight to some of the wet markets and to some great spots that we possibly wouldn't have known about or would have taken us longer to find. And so it's great having that background to add to that. We knew what we wanted. We had an idea of what we wanted to shoot, and that's what we came out to do. And I think for me, it's always great to get into the parts of the city that other people don't often go into. And to your point of just walking and kind of getting lost, I think those often yield the best moments because you're just walking and you find yourself in places that you didn't know you'd get into, or down alleyways and streets, and you meet people there that are genuine and real, and you see a side of the city away from the touristy side of things or the commercial side of things, and you're connecting with real people and real moments. And I think those are often the most rewarding. And just looking back, I loved getting into people, just their daily life and grind. Everyone's got a bicycle, everyone's got a motorbike. You've seen some fascinating people balancing boxes and just so much stuff on these bicycles. And there's a few shots there that have really stood out. And whether it be people working in the city or working on the incense farms, like everyone is doing something and working at something. And it's what stood out to me, and even in the images, is the ingenuity and how people have been able to adapt to that. They put a lot of work, the weaving of the baskets, the bird cages. It's a bird cage, but like the amount of level and craftsmanship going into making those cages, it's really special to see. And photographing that has been something that's been quite enjoyable.
I know, we started off early on, in the first day here, and you're photographing these wide shots, and in those wide shots, you're seeing literally thousands of motor scooters, whether it's bicycles or more like, mopeds, that kind of thing, Vespas, etc. And in the foreground, you might have 500 scooters, and then beyond that you have people and they're living lives. And I made an image with two men who were playing a board game, and they were very intensely playing this game, but then surrounded by hundreds of bikes. And that's a wide shot. Then we started taking essentially portraits of people riding bicycles and women with these really traditional round hats on, and they're carrying vegetables and so forth. And that's showing sort of the history of not only transportation, but of taking goods to market. Then today, you and we found a great location on a street corner, and we were working on panning and taking slow speed pan shots of those very same motor scooters. So the theme is transportation and commerce all around these scooters, which are everywhere you look. So, in that example, you can have portraits that have the scooter. You can have the panning shots, which really blur the background and make that singular rider stand out. You could have portraits where there is a bike, and on the front of the bike is a giant sort of tray of vegetables and fruits, and you have a vendor there. So the theme is the bike. So that's the through line. And we purposefully were looking for those opportunities because it's so representative of this area, not to be the only thing we do, but it's a part of it. And, we saw so many bikes in every sort of condition, from, brand new scooters to ones that look like they were probably 45 years old. So it's just, that became sort of a central theme. And I think that, wherever you go, there's something there that is a central theme. If you're in Cuba, it's people with cigars, men and women, old and young, and, cigars, whether it's people smoking cigars, selling cigars, cigars in an ashtray. Just to use an example, if you're in New York City, you've got all sorts of, other things. You've got the taxi cabs. There's a million taxi cabs. So just as we focused on the bikes here, you could focus on the taxi cabs and so forth. So there's just something to sort of ground you and focus you as a photographer, not to preclude you from photographing anything you want, but just to kind of give you a bit of a game plan. Some people will even say, when I'm walking a street, I want to photograph things that are of a certain color. I want to photograph red objects. I'm going to photograph other things, but if it's a red car, a red building, a red scarf, it's just a way to give some focus. Have you done those sort of, almost like a mind game at all? Like when you're leading the tours and people seem to be just sort of shooting this, shooting that, shooting the other thing, and don't really have a plan?
Yeah, it's good to be focused because, I think for me, in wildlife it's a little bit more tougher but you have a place, you have an animal, you have a target animal, be it a leopard in a pretty environment with a cub. You kind of, in my head, I'm leading people towards a goal, which is intimate moments between mom and cub, or lions on the open plains about to conduct a hunt, and kind of what that theme would be. But yeah, most certainly, I think it's good to stay in that lane and to shoot for a purpose. I very much believe in that. Otherwise, it becomes very haphazard, and your photographs will show. So exactly to your theme, I think in Hanoi, it's really been it's people hustling, it's people working, it's early morning hours. This place wakes up before sunrise. It's busy until after midnight, and it's all hustle. It's people working for every dime, every cent, and there's so many cool ways to capture and portray that. And certainly something that if you have that in back of mind, it comes through and shows through in the photographs that you end up taking.
And from a purely practical standpoint, where we are here in Hanoi, it really is quite humid, and it's not even as humid right now as it can be. So, one thing to be aware of is how environment affects your gear. Everything from literally shutting your gear off when it is excessively hot or excessively cold, to humidity, to the effect of being in a heated environment, going to very cold, or going from air conditioning out to very hot, very humid. What would be your advice, for people who maybe haven't traveled quite so much into different environments, about how to take care of your gear and things to be aware of?
Research. It's as simple as that. From my side, I'm still doing research. I've shot a few times in humid environments like the one we're really heading into now. Hanoi is a good example and a good introduction. I know your gear fogged up this morning unexpectedly, but yeah, just understanding what your cameras are going to go through. If you're in hot places, you're likely going to stay in an air-conditioned room. I hope for your part you are, because humidity can really affect your cameras, and it's carrying everything from little sachets to absorb humidity, to keeping your gear in sealed bags and bathrooms, maybe taking it out early in the morning before you head out, because it makes a difference. If you don't do that, you're not going to use your camera for an hour or two when the day finally kicks in. Or if you head to see really cold places like the Himalayas or Svalbard, and temperatures really drop, keeping your batteries close by because they drain really quickly. And there's definitely things you can do. In Africa, it's dusty, so you don't want to be changing lenses very often. You want to keep those sensors clean. And so it's having 2 or 3 camera bodies, each on a lens, so that you don't have to change. And it really, really helps you. And again, the research side is key for that. If you're working through an operator or an agent or wildlife photographic guide or a travel guide, they should be able to help you. And you ask them, absolutely, check in before and ask, what do I need to do? What do I need to bring to make sure that I'm going to be prepared and that my gear will be in working condition? So bit of research, bit of asking a friend, they'll always help you. Even Instagram is great. Many people will reach out. I get questions all the time. I try to reply to them. People asking me about camera gear, advice. Just now, somebody asked, they're coming tomorrow, where do we photograph the incense gardens? So I was able to tell them, gave them an address, and it helps, Had she not asked, she wouldn't have known. So it's cool to do that, and it all just boils down to understanding where you're going, and the better prepared you are, the greater the time you're going to have.
Yeah, and just even using the U.S. as a perspective, I can remember leaving my hotel very early, 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning in New Orleans. I walked outside, and the humidity was so intense. This was in August, and it was 30 minutes or so until the fogginess inside my camera cleared. And so, you really do need to be aware of that. And if you want to start shooting something at 7 a.m. or 8 a.m., then you may need to be outside 45 minutes earlier, because what you don't want to do is have the camera fog up and wipe the lens, because 2 things happens. Number one, it's going to fog up immediately.
Instantly.
Yeah, wiping it is not going to resolve it. Now you're going to have essentially water on the lens, droplets, and when that dries, it's going to streak your lens. So you just have to let it clear on its own. Your lens will be clear. It just takes time, and that's that there's no substitute for just kind of waiting it out. And it's not something that you want to hear, but it's kind of the reality. So I'll sort of close with this question. what would you say your top one or two places or situations has been in Hanoi that you've been able to photograph while you're here?
Ooh, put me on the spot here. Definitely the incense gardens, like the woman with the color, the red, the incense sticks. That was, for me, that was like really beautiful to see. I loved how that came together, and it just made a picture that for me very much stood out. And then if I so one definitely the human element, and the other one that I really enjoyed was the train. Uh, there's a street where the train passes extremely close to you, and even though I knew what to expect, I didn't think the train was as fast, as big, got that close. And kind of before the train comes through, it's just they shoo everyone out the way and make sure everyone's up against the side of the walls, and then this train just blasts through, and it's wind, and it's just wild. And then as soon as it passes, it's back to normal again, and all the tables come out, and people are taking photos, and I really enjoyed that, and I think that certainly was something I was looking forward to seeing in Hanoi. I think it's something very special to the city and unique to the city, the train road. And I enjoyed those. I'd say those stood out to me the most. It's the ladies in the incense garden and the train. Very, very cool experiences.
Yeah, definitely unique. And even though those were unique, again, just barely scratching the surface of what this country has. The other thing that I would mention, and I've done this before, I've done this in Rome, and we've done this while we're here, is if photography is really something that you are very focused on, I know that sounds like a pun, but guides are not incredibly expensive. And if it's something that you're focused on, even if you hire a guide for half a day, or maybe 2 half days, just to kind of point you in the direction of things, and maybe then you can take it from there. But at least you're going to maximize your amount of time. You're going to shorten the learning curve in that city, and you'll really get to the places that you want to get to. And if they're photographers, or you make sure they know that you have a real photographic purpose, they will do that. And so, Marlon, I want to thank you for joining me now for the second time. It's always great to be with you. It's always great to have you on the podcast. For people who I know want to follow you and see what you have going on photographically, where you're leading trips around the world, where are the best places for people to learn more?
Thanks, Mitch. Yeah, the website is Africa with a K.com. So check out what I do on there, as well as social media channels, just Marlon de Toit on any, especially Instagram and Facebook. And I'm on a few other ones, but those are the main. Website, Instagram, Facebook, Marlon de Toit, and tundaafrica.com. Thanks, Mitch.
And I want to thank everybody for joining us for this special edition of Artist Spotlight, the podcast on the road. It's just been great, and we're going to try to add to these as we go. And for everybody listening, I want to remind you that we publish on the 1st and the 15th of every month. I invite you to like and subscribe. Helps us get the word out. It also makes sure that you are aware of each episode the minute it drops, so you can download it, or it can auto-download, and you're ready to roll on the 1st and 15th. So as far as what I have going on, you can always check me out on Instagram. That's where you'll get the latest. It's Mitch Stringer Images. As far as the Maryland Photography Alliance, it's mdphotoalliance.org. Great place to go. Bookmark it so you can check back periodically and see what's going on. And until next time, I wish you great light. I wish you great shooting. We'll talk again soon.